In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Alexander the Great set off from Greece to conquer the rich land of his Persian foe. His campaign would take him thousands of kilometers from his homeland across Afghanistan in Central Asia. I want to find out what the world looked like to Alexander. But this landscape today is radically different to the way it appeared in the time of the ancient Greeks. And I believe the reason is extreme climate change. So this place was an inland waterway, and the Greeks, according to this theory, could have sailed right past here. Today, remnants of the age when water connected these lands still survive. There's a glimmer of the extraordinary Oxus civilization that once thrived in these arid and barren lands. Great cities and trade routes first recorded by explorers that sailed on ancient seas. I'm starting my journey as Alexander the Great did, in Greece. This is Volos Harbour, around 4 hours' drive from the modern capital today, Athens. Now, as the crow flies, it's about 4,000 kilometres to Afghanistan. Now, in the time of Alexander the Great, that was the end of the world. But what's amazing about Alexander is that he wasn't the first to travel to the east. The Greeks have been drawn to the east since the earliest of times. I want to see what connections there are to Alexander and who may have inspired him. So the ancient Greeks were a pretty intrepid bunch. The trouble is, all those legends that surround their great voyages means that it's really hard to work out what actually happened. But behind some of them, there's an element of truth. And the most famous of them was Jason and the Argonauts. Thanks to the government of Volos, we've been given use of their replica of Jason's celebrated boat, the Argo, to explore what truth lies behind Jason's fabled voyage. When Jason and his crew of Argonauts are thought to have set sail over 3,000 years ago, ships like this plied the Aegean Sea. Jason and the Argonauts is an ancient Greek myth, a tale passed down for millennia. The hero, Prince Jason, and his crew of Argonauts sailed across distant seas in search of the magical Golden Fleece. The fleece was a symbol of prosperity for his family and his kingdom. Well, I guess by now you're wondering what Jason and the Argonauts has to do with Alexander the Great in Afghanistan. And if you accept the popularized version of the story, well, nothing at all. But there are far more ancient fragments that tell a very different journey for Jason. Now, if I'm right, this will shed some amazing light on where the legend came from and, perhaps more importantly, where they went. And that's got everything to do with my quest for Alexander's lost world. I think the origins of the Jason myth are based on real facts. I want to find out how the story of Jason and his Argonauts began. Our modern-day Jason, and captain of this Argo, is Babylos Stavros. Over the years, he and the Argonauts Rowing Club have sailed from one side of the Aegean Sea to the other. If you're going to explore the legend of Jason and the Argonauts, this is the crew to do it with. This Argo is a 50-oared war galley, what's known as a pentaconta. Crafted by hand using Bronze Age tools and techniques, there's not a nail to be found anywhere along its 28-metre-long hull. In ancient times, versatile craft like this were used for long-range sea trade. The popular version of the Jason myth says that in 1263 BC, they set sail from Mycenae in Bronze Age Greece into the Aegean Sea. They crossed the Sea of Marmara and passed through the Bosphorus into the Black Sea, where they turned eastwards onto the land of the Golden Fleece, thought today to be in the Republic of Georgia. But this can't be right. There's no evidence that the Mycenaean Greeks ever sailed to Georgia. What's more, Georgia wasn't a major centre of gold production. That makes the idea of Georgia as the land of the Golden Fleece hard for me to believe.
Hey up! Hey up! Hey up!
The oldest Greek versions of the story tell of a different route. And they hold a clue. The legendary Argonauts were heading far further than Georgia, to the remote east. What they say is that they sailed out of the Black Sea into the ocean and then came around Africa back into the Mediterranean. What these guys are talking about is a journey out of the Black Sea, not to the Black Sea. Now, if you look at a map of the Black Sea today, there's only two ways out of it. One is the Danube, the other is the River Don. Now, both of those don't lead to any sea. So, was it back then somehow different? Was there a way that you could sail out of the Black Sea? Well, that's what we're going to find out. One of the oldest versions of the story comes from the ancient Greek writer Homer. His epic poems suggest that thousands of years ago, the world looked very different to the way it looks today. Water levels were so much higher, the seas, lakes and rivers of the Earth would be unrecognisable to us now. At the end of the last ice age, around 14,000 years ago, climate change began to melt the vast ice sheets of the Northern Hemisphere, causing mega floods. The Caspian Sea rose more than 50 metres. That's over 160 feet. As it continued to rise, it spilled over, flooding into the Black Sea. These two seas were once connected by a massive waterway, and I believe it's the trading link described in legends as the River Phasis. So from around 12,000 BC, it was possible to sail from Greece across the Black Sea and on to the east, just as Homer described. Now, the timing of these mega floods is still hotly debated. But what's important for us is the connection between the seas likely remained open till around 6,000 BC. And that is a game changer. The ancient Greek tale of Jason and his brave Argonauts could have originated thousands of years earlier than we think, with the first people to sail across this ancient waterway. We're pulling into shore because there's a very special place I want to see, a short distance out of town.
Experience the past like never before with History Hit's award-winning original documentaries and ad-free podcasts with our expert historians like Dan Snow, Susanna Lipscomb, Lucy Worsley, Mary Beard, Tristan Hughes and myself, Matt Lewis. Sign up for an exclusive discount using the link in the description and embark on your historical journey from the wonders of ancient Egypt and the life of Anne Boleyn to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the discovery of Shackleton's endurance. Get history wherever, whenever, exclusively on History Hit.
This is a site that's so ancient, it's older than the Jason myth. It dates back to the very first seafarers to ever set foot here. This is Sesklo. I'm just a couple of kilometres away from where the Argos anchored. But 9,000 years ago, this was a Neolithic settlement. And why it's so special is because this is where Eastern seafarers first landed in Greece. And from here, the Neolithic revolution spread all over Europe. In the Neolithic era, a revolutionary change in human civilization was taking hold. People left the nomadic lifestyle and began to farm. Now they could rely on a stable source of food, and this in turn gave them the freedom to travel. Archaeologists refer to it as the Great Exodus. In a series of voyages between 7 and 6000 BC, pioneering seafarers sailed westwards from the coasts of Turkey and Syria across the eastern Mediterranean all the way to Greece. What's so significant for us is the place where these seafarers settled, right here, is exactly the same place that the Jason legend begins. I believe the story of Jason and the Argonauts is far older than we've ever believed. I think it originates with those seafarers. So instead of being a Bronze Age tale told only 3,000 years ago, I'm convinced the legend of Jason and his Argonauts began with the true story of pioneering Neolithic mariners who migrated across the world when the seas were connected. And there's a remarkable record of Neolithic seafarers that survives today. This is a pictograph of a Neolithic sea vessel scored into the rocks of Gobustan, over 2,000 kilometers to the east in Azerbaijan. These are boats with keels. Some have as many as 37 oarsmen. They suggest that Neolithic seafarers had developed the technology needed for long-distance marine navigation. So they could have travelled and traded between east and west. For all this to be feasible, there must be some evidence that the waterway linking these seas, the legendary Oxus River, actually existed. Like the Neolithic mariners, I'm heading from Greece across the Black Sea to southern Russia. Water levels have dropped by as much as 75 metres. That's nearly 250 feet. But I believe that a remnant of the Phasis still survives. It's known as the Manich Waterway. It runs for over 600 kilometres, almost all the way to the Caspian, in a chain of lakes, streams and boggy wetlands. This is a conservation area, and I've jumped on board a Parks and Wildlife boat to explore. When water levels here were higher, these rivers and marshes were part of the immense Phasis waterway. What's truly remarkable is that after 8,000 years, Kazakhstan and the Russians are planning to reopen it. In a series of canals and dikes, they're going to actually connect the seas again. And once again, you'll be able to sail from the Black Sea through to the Caspian. Just like the Russians today, the ancient Greeks had the same idea. Very likely inspired by the myth of Jason, Alexander the Great believed that once an ancient connection between the seas had existed. And in 282 BC, a Macedonian general named Patroclus was ordered to search the Caspian Sea to find out if it was still possible to sail between east and west. Patroclus' report reveals that he reached the point where the Manic waterway begins today. Here, he would almost certainly have seen all that remained was a series of streams and marshes. In an astonishing series of conquests, Alexander expanded the Greek Empire all the way to the borders of India. Like his mythic hero Jason, Alexander found immense riches in eastern lands. He realized to make his new empire work, he had to transport these lucrative goods back to Greece. The answer was to create a shipping route. Even though the river Phasis no longer flowed, Patroclus still had to find a connection between the Caspian Sea and the trade routes of India. Greek records tell us that Patroclus found a way to sail from the Caspian to Central Asia's mightiest river, the Oxus, a waterway that flowed thousands of kilometers to the east. Like Patroclus, I'm now heading to the southeastern shore of the Caspian in modern Turkmenistan to find the ancient connection to the river Oxus. The problem is, today, the Caspian and the Oxus are far from connected. They're separated by almost 700 kilometers of desert. Water levels have dropped so much that today it's a completely different world.
So is this all sand dunes out here?
Yeah.
And how far does that go?
Around 180 kilometers.
I want to reach the point where the Caspian ends today. For the next month, Bava will be my guide and interpreter of all things Turkmen.
He said that just take this road.
And so that's where he says
There-
the water finishes
Yes.
there. Well, this is probably as far as it comes. Can we stop here, Gooch? This looks right. Well, this whole place is all salt. It's what's left of the ancient sea. But over here is where the Caspian comes to an end, or at least it's how far east it travels today. So that poses an incredible riddle, because according to the ancient Greeks, they were able to sail right across here and up to the Oxus. So the riddle is, what happened to the river?
The Greeks describe a vast waterway where trade from the Oxus could be transported to the west. It's hard to imagine that this barren, salty landscape was once a busy and fertile shipping route.
To prove that Patroclus' journey was possible, I need to find a trace of the ancient riverbed. Our search leads us into one of the most extreme places on Earth, the Karakum Desert. Summer temperatures can reach 52 degrees Celsius. In the depths of winter, they plummet to a bone-freezing 40 below. This is virgin territory for all of us. According to Bava, no outsiders and few locals even attempt crossing this sea of sand.
So if it looks a bit deeper, a bit sticky, the mud,
Yeah.
do you think we should turn around?
I think so. You know, it might rain too, so let's not take a risk.
We're following the dry and broken bed of a river that today is called the Osboy. Could it once have been a branch of the mighty Oxus Delta that Patroclus recorded? 200 kilometers into the desert, and the Osboy is starting to show signs of water flow.
Looks like a moonscape, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Incredibly barren and very, very lonely.
Tracking the river's course from higher ground is too difficult, so Bava's arranged a more traditional mode of transport. Friend Toli has agreed to take us out on horseback, so we can get down to the Osboy bed and explore.
That's interesting. If you're wondering why Toli's actually putting on a costume, it's not for us, it's not for show. It's so traditional here that they couldn't bear the thought of actually getting on a horse without looking like a Turkoman warrior. There's a saying right here all throughout this country that paradise is on the back of a horse.
Locals like Toli are known as the Artili, people of the horse. They're quite possibly descendants of the ancient settlers that came here when this was a verdant water world. The rest of the team will follow with all the gear, food and water in this monster. A Russian Kamaz, without a doubt, one of the toughest vehicles ever made. In this barren and desolate region, there's a ruin that stands as a monument to ancient river culture. This is the only substantial fortress to be unearthed on the broken watercourse of the Osboy. It was part of a settlement called Igdikala, and it was built around 200 AD, 500 years after the voyage of Patroclus.
It's like it was yesterday. It's amazing that probably a good-sized town lived in this place, whether it was a place where there was taxes collected by water traffic or whether it was completely dry here and it was actually caravans coming through. It shows you how climate change can totally change a place. People could not live here today. It's far too dry and there's no water. It's all salt water.
It's all that remains of a once thriving ancient city. Perched on high ground, Igdi would have been perfectly placed to guard the flow of people and trade. But the very presence of this fortress town suggests that even after the time of Patroclus, water levels here were still far higher than they are today. In the time of the ancient Greeks, the Oxus was a mighty floodway, as wide as the Egyptian Nile. The problem is, the Osboy is a slow, meandering river. These gorges are just 100 metres across at their widest points. That's only 300 feet. The Oxus would have been at least 5 times as wide. So there's just no way the Osboy could be the river connection I'm looking for. We've travelled over 350 kilometres across the Karakum sands. And we're going to spend another freezing night in the desert. Hey, thank you.
It's fantastic. Basically, it's a whole sheep, boiled, and this is the juice. And it's fantastic. It's cold outside, and this is really warm, and the vodka is helping.
Vodka is best.
Vodka is best.
Давай, чин-чин.
Chin-chin.
Okay, come back.
This has always been a land rich in resources. This fiery crater is seeping natural methane gas. It was ignited only 40 years ago, but it's earned the name Gate to Hell. In ancient times, sailors like Patroclus could use this kind of geographical landmark to navigate. And these extraordinary natural phenomena inspired Greek legends. Aristotle would have told Alexander of the gods and monsters believed to have roamed the lands of the East. I believe somewhere in this mysterious, deserted terrain are signs of the ancient Oxus River delta that Patroclus described. The vital link in Alexander the Great's vision of a shipping route between East and West. There's one forgotten theory that could hold the key. In 1898, Ellsworth Huntington, professor of geography at Yale University, analysed the fluctuation of the Caspian. He declared that the Osboy was not a river at all, but part of an estuary. Water levels were still so high in the time of the ancient Greeks that the Caspian and the Aral Seas were larger than they are today. And the terrain between the seas would have been covered with water, making a series of vast wetlands. Huntington's theory helps explain how Patroclus was able to sail east from the Caspian into the great delta of the Oxus. After 10 days of trekking through some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth, we find what we've been looking for. But I was completely unprepared for the grandeur of the ancient shore. Standing here, it's clear that this was once the edge of a great inland sea. So, if this theory is correct, what it means is that the sea level, all the way from the Caspian right through to here and to the Aral, was much higher. Now, where I stopped up there is 250 feet, and that's where they reckon that the sea level got to. So this place was an inland waterway, and the Greeks, according to this theory, could have sailed right past here. 2,300 years ago, this would have been a maze of river channels and countless reed beds. A bountiful wetland, just as Patroclus and the Greeks reported. I've heard that to the north lie the ruins of a magnificent city, settled by the Persians around the time Alexander travelled east. It's clear to see that the city was built on the edge of a headland and would have dominated the waterfront. This is the great fortress of Dev Kessen. Today, Dev Kessen lies right on the Turkmenistan-Uzbekistan border in no man's land.
The trenches for the border, is it?
It's off limits, but amazingly, Bava gets us through. Being able to enter this fortress is a first, even for him.
That's an old defensive wall out there. This is a city in here.
The city's built upon a 30-metre high escarpment. It was protected from attack by a system of moats and defensive walls that lead back through the city entrance to the central citadel, or Arg.
Have you ever seen a gate or an entrance like this anywhere? It's quite incredible. It's the shape of a battle axe or a semicircle. That would have been one drawbridge and one moat. And then over here, there's a whole nother moat. Another drawbridge would have taken you into the city.
You can sense the ancients here. A place of such obvious prosperity must hold so many stories of life, death, and ultimately collapse. The first settlers would likely have been followers of an ancient monotheistic religion called Zoroastrianism. But this shrine dates back to more recent medieval occupation and the arrival of Islam 900 years ago. As the wetlands upon which the city depended dried up, Dev Kessen's eventual demise was inevitable.
Well, I'm absolutely blown away by this place. It is magnificent, and particularly because it hasn't been robbed. Basically, as far as archaeology is concerned, it's intact. But if you can imagine what this place was like, people lived here from about 400 BC, perhaps earlier, all the way through to about 1550, 1600. Now, this would have been an enormous gate into the central Arg where the Khan would have lived. And behind me, on the top there, would have probably been originally a Zoroastrian burial site. But really, this is an amazing fortress.
But Dev Kessen is not alone. Along this ancient sea coast are more than half a dozen ruined cities and citadels. And like Dev Kessen, all of them are built on high ground. The signs are everywhere of a massive drop in water levels.
Well, this is quite a hole in the ground, this. Wow. And I think, quite obviously, at the well, and I don't really want to actually topple into it because if I have a look down, well, it's a good 30 metres. And what it is an amazing indicator of what these people went through over the centuries, because it probably started at where the water level was much higher, as quite shallow. And then as the water has shifted away and drained away, they've had to tunnel and tunnel. And it's a hell of a long way. This would have had a huge contraption above it with donkeys pulling up big buckets of water, which would have been the water for the whole city. It's an incredible thing to have remaining. Usually these get filled in quite quickly. This one's completely intact, and it's quite marvellous. And there's something down there. Woo, here he comes. Hey.
The story of the lost city of Dev Kessen is a century-by-century gauge of the radical climate change that happened here. What's remarkable is that the very same thing is taking place today. We're heading even further north in the wake of the ancient Greeks into the former Soviet Union, modern-day Uzbekistan. I'm looking for the coast of the Aral Sea, and 60 years ago, this wasn't desert, but seabed. Just 2 generations ago, fishing fleets harvested great shoals of fish here. Like the aftermath of a tsunami, the last of the Aral fishing fleet lies scattered, like children's toys in the sand. But here the end was not caused by the sudden impact of an enormous wave. The people of the Aral literally watched their livelihoods slowly ebb away. We finally make out the grey blue of the seashore. This coastline has retreated by almost 100 kilometres. With no rainfall to speak of, the Aral relies exclusively on the waters of the ancient Oxus and the Xerxes. But these rivers have been so depleted by the impact of Soviet irrigation schemes that hardly a drop reaches the Aral shores. It ranks as one of Earth's greatest environmental disasters. Today, this sea is on the brink of extinction.
According to my GPS, it's about 54 feet above mean sea level. That's about 16 metres. Now that's an incredible change from the 1960s, when the sea level was 100 feet higher than where I'm standing. What's also incredible, it's incredibly cold. It's about -2 degrees. My hands are absolutely numb, and operating this thing is quite difficult.
Patrocles records the distance from here to the Caspian, but makes no mention of the Aral Sea. Water levels here were so high, the Aral was part of a connected waterway.
What for me is amazing is that 2,500 years ago, the sea level was actually 200 feet higher. At the time of Alexander, this whole area was inundated. So what it means is our climate, and particularly this area, has been very, very changeable over thousands of years, much more changeable than we've ever thought.
Like Patrocles, we've travelled across the Caspian all the way to the Aral Sea. Now we're heading south towards Afghanistan to reach the Oxus River. In the time of the ancient Greeks, it would have been a leisurely sail from here to the Oxus Delta. But for us today, it's a 300-kilometre drive. After 2 weeks of desert travel, we're about to reach our goal. When the Greeks arrived, they found the heart of a civilization that was already more than 2,000 years old.
Well, this is it, the Oxus, what they called the great parent stream of humanity. And it was supposed to have rocked the cradle of our race. Now today, it still flows 2,500 kilometres from the roof of the world almost to the Aral Sea. It is one of the world's great rivers.
Today, it disappears not far from here in 1,000 irrigation canals. But in the time of Patrocles, this river was in full flow. He'd succeeded in his mission. Patrocles confirmed that just as Alexander had imagined, this great river did carry trade from India through Central Asia to the Caspian Sea. Now I want to cross the river to find out more about the Oxus civilization the Greeks discovered here. These Turkmen are on a cattle drive, and they're heading for the same place we are, a ferry boat. Today, only half a dozen of these old Soviet-era ferries operate along the river. The traffic slowly died as the Oxus trade diminished, countries and borders changed, and roads and vehicles spread.
Well, barges like this have been going up and down the Oxus for a long time. Right through the Soviet period, you could actually sail from the Aral Sea. Today that's not possible, but in the Greeks' time, this river would have been full of traffic.
Nowadays, these ferry crews are among the last of the Oxus Rivermen, a tradition that stretches back to the Greeks and beyond. Long ago, the Oxus was an ancient highway with thousands of settlements, citadels, and fortresses spread out across its tributaries. And there's one place, now deep in the desert, that straddled this system over 4,000 years ago. These are the ruins of the city of Gonur. In its heyday, it was a huge trading centre in a series of Bronze Age states that stretch for over 100 kilometres along the Oxus Valley. Discovered in 1972 by Soviet archaeologist Viktor Sarianidi, this city footprint has changed the way we think about the ancient world. Even today, it's clear to see Gonur's maze of streets. It's an extraordinary experience to stroll through the alleyways of a city that was flourishing in the Bronze Age, over 1,500 years before the arrival of Alexander. The people that lived here fired ceramics in kilns, grew grain, and raised livestock. Archaeologists have even found traces of a sophisticated irrigation system. And what's really amazing is the city's layout. A rectangular settlement enclosed by powerful defensive walls and semicircular bastions. Gonur was an imperial city. Inside its fortified palace complex were royal living quarters and funeral chambers. These excavations reveal that, like ancient Egypt, royal tombs were filled with golden treasures and animals to sustain them in the afterlife.
Well, Baba tells me that this is most likely the king's horse because it's buried just next to his burial chamber. And it just shows you for how long the horse has been revered in this land. Almost 5,500 years. I guess nothing's really changed here.
Gonur was a major commercial centre, comparable to ancient cities in Egypt and the Indus Valley. It seems like it sprung from the desert, but thousands of years ago there was water all around.
Well, once this was actually full of water. This was probably the king's reservoir. And this was a filtration system that took the mud out of the river or the canal water, so it was pure. But then something went radically wrong, and this place was abandoned.
Gonur and its sister cities vanished just as mysteriously as they'd appeared. So, how can this all be explained? How could a civilization simply appear, thrive for 500 years or more, and then just as mysteriously disappear. Really, that's just another example of just how fragile human society really is. These places thrived, and then they were turned to dust. Conquering armies like Alexander may have sped up the process, but really it's been the environment that's decided the fate of mankind. Behind the demise of Gonur lies the extreme climate change that altered the course of the Oxus. The whole place is covered in salt. Wow. Well, this is incredible. This is an ancient lake. Now, my GPS has brought us here, and it's confirmed the research that I've been doing. Basically, all the way from Afghanistan right through here to the Caspian is a low depression. Now, I think it's the bed of the ancient river, because all of these lakes actually were once full, and carbon dating has shown that 5,000 years ago, this was actually a huge swampland. When it had too much water, or the river changed course, it came through here, flooded these lakes, and this was an entirely different world. Through the ages, the changes in the course of the Oxus have been so volatile, locals named it Ceyhun, the crazy river. This is my last night with Bava and the guys. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to even attempt this journey, following the trail of ancient pioneers who crossed the globe when this was a water world. So it was the Oxus, the Ceyhun, the crazy river, that determined how civilizations developed here. The river changed its course, destroying one civilization and giving birth to another. An incredible river in this amazing land. In the time of Alexander, the Greeks ventured into a lost world. Along the Oxus, they discovered a forgotten Bronze Age culture so magnificent it rivaled any on Earth. The Greeks were inspired by the legend of Jason and the Argonauts to search for a shipping route between the East and the West. And Patroclus' extraordinary mission proved that once the Oxus did indeed flow through to the Caspian. Today, all that's missing is the water. But far from the end of our journey, this is just the beginning. Changing sea levels and disappearing rivers are not all the Greeks tell us. Intriguing accounts of Alexander's conquests in Persian territory lead us to the fabled city of Bactra, that today lies across the border in Afghanistan. One of the problems about exploring places like this is these areas are full of landmines. A place where ruined fortresses, settlements and age-old infrastructure still survive. Echoes of a lost culture that thrived here long before the rise of ancient Greece. This would be one of the rarest things you could find here. It's probably something like 3,500 BC. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Inspired by heroic tales of eastern lands, Alexander forged new frontiers for the ancient Greek Empire. His army campaigned along the river Oxus to capture cities governed by their Persian rivals. 2,500 years ago, the cities of the Oxus made up an incredible civilization. They were the equal of anywhere else on Earth. But then, that would all be changed by one man. Here, they call him the devil Ixander. We know him as Alexander the Great. And at the head of a huge army, in just a few years, he would change this civilization forever. Today in modern Afghanistan, the cities that Alexander found are all but lost. But traces of fortresses, settlements, and age-old infrastructure still survive. Echoes of a culture that once thrived here. I want to find the fabled capital occupied by Alexander, the ancient city of Bactra. This is the heavily patrolled border of Afghanistan and Turkmenistan, one of the most remote and little used borders on Earth. Getting permission to film here was never going to happen. So my cameraman Greg decides to accidentally leave his camera on. There's a 2-kilometre stretch of no man's land before you reach the Afghan border post, and neither side provides transport. So we find a truck driver who, for a fee, agrees to take us across. Thank you very much. This electrified fence encloses a minefield. It stretches for more than 800 kilometres along the border, and every 15 or 20 kilometres there's a defence post. Visitors are not welcome here. Almost no Westerners cross this border. Taliban insurgency has been on the rise in northern Afghanistan. Security is tight and border guards are edgy. At the midway point, we're stopped and called over by the Afghan guard on duty.
Hello. This camera's all sick. Look here.
Greg makes out like he's just cleaning the camera lens.
Are
you from Afghanistan? Kabul? The question is the guard going to let us in, or is he going to turn us back? Then we realise he's called for a vehicle.
We get a back. Thank you very much.
The guard drives us out of no man's land to the Afghan border post.
Documentary.
We've reached the Afghan side,
Just put it up there, Greg.
but it's not over yet. The last step is to pass the customs check.
That's the waterproof camera case.
We've just crossed over into Afghanistan. In ancient times, this was another world. The land of Bactria, the greatest kingdom ever to rise along the river Oxus. Like Alexander, I want to find the capital, the fabled city of Bactra. For Alexander, taking control of Bactra was of major strategic importance in his fight against the Persian Empire. But to date, archaeologists have found no absolute proof of its location. So, where is the ancient capital that Alexander and the Greeks knew as the mother of all cities? We're heading into the Afghan wilderness. Out here, roadblocks and hijackings are all too common. Ravaged by war, this region has been off limits for historians and archaeologists for decades. Westerners are a target, and so I've come with as small a crew as possible. Our driver Habib and our guide Reza have spent the last few years dodging bullets, trying to document the ancient sites around here. We travel in daylight, at full speed, and don't stop for anything. We make it into the relative safety of Andkhoy, one of the oldest centres of trade in Central Asia. There's no tourism out here, but luckily Reza knows a bloke who owns a tea house, our sanctuary for the night.
This is fine. I would almost say palatial. Yeah. That's great. Cheers. Good to meet.
I've come to Andkhoy because I want to explore the bazaar. This part of Afghanistan has always been famous for trade in commodities like wool and lambskin, and today nothing's changed.
Well, this is the market of Andkhoy. It's one of the most famous in the world because it's basically intact. It hasn't changed probably in thousands of years. And people have been trading here and buying and selling grapes for that long. But the main thing it's known for is carpets.
The Turkmen-style carpets made here are some of the finest in the world. The craftsmen in workshops like this one are continuing a tradition that's been passed down for generations. And there's a clue to the ancient city of Bactra woven into these carpets. Reza tells me that they're much more than just antique rugs. If you look closely, you can see that they're living pictographs of ancient fortifications.
So is this based on the design of castles and citadels, these designs?
Yes, sometimes because it's really old, and sometimes it's copied from the castle. And the old people is remember for example the castle or the kings or other very big building. So they're copying, yeah.
Wow.
Here is a revealing connection to our search for Bactra. Since the earliest of times, the Bactrian Empire was known as the land of 1,000 cities. The geometric patterns in these carpets reflect the heavily fortified cities of Bactria. The trouble is, they're so stylized, it's hard to get a real indication of what one particular city actually looked like. it's lovely, huh? Look at that. Okay, I say 180. Thank you very much.
It's not only the carpets that connect us to ancient Bactra. If you want to look into the face of an ancient Bactrian, look no further. Today, the Turkoman and the Uzbeks are ethnic minorities. But in essence, they're the same people. Northern Afghanistan is a patchwork of cultures that often don't see eye to eye. But they do have one great thing in common: their ancient past. I want to find out more about the defences Alexander came up against when he invaded this ancient realm. We've come from the Afghan border to Andkhoy, and now we're heading for an archaeological site called Emesh Tepe, one of the great perimeter fortresses of Bactria. This has been frontier territory since ancient times. Even today, Emesh Tepe is a commanding vantage point in the arid borderlands between modern Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. Although there are no obvious ruins here today, this was once an imposing fortified town. Built by the Persians soon after they conquered Bactria around 500 BC. That's almost 200 years before Alexander arrived.
Well, I know this place looks a little bit like a football stadium after a sandstorm. So what we're going to do is try and bring it to life with a few tricks of photography and a little bit of computer work to show you what this was like about 2,500 years ago.
It's not until you actually get down into it that you get an idea of its scale. Almost 2 kilometers in circumference. But what's extraordinary is because of their location, very few of these citadels have ever been explored.
What we're attempting to do with this marvellous Italian invention here is to actually take 360 degrees of photographs. And there's a little notch down here which is marked in all the different points of the compass. And so what we do is click it around and take a photograph each time. And then this little spirit level here, which Reza is going to monitor so it doesn't move, is hopefully going to keep the pole really straight. So we zip it round in a circle and then hopefully you'll be able to see this at 360 degrees. Okay, you right?
The big realization for me is that this part of Afghanistan was far from a remote backwater. Two 2,500 years ago, it was part of an advanced civilization, home to a community of thousands of Bactrians and Persians. Protected by its mighty walls and impregnable citadel. Emesh Tepe was just one of a series of fortresses that made up a state-of-the-art defense system, earning Bactria a reputation as the land of 1,000 cities. And like Alexander and his 30,000 strong army, I want to find the Bactrian capital. Today, the ruins of the city of Bactra are thought to be near the modern town of Balkh. And that's a 5-hour drive away. By the time Alexander reached the valley of the Oxus, he'd won a series of decisive victories against his Persian enemy. And instead of fighting Alexander, the local Bactrians submitted to his rule. We're trying to avoid unplanned stops, but we've still got to eat. Habib has brought us to one of his favourite spots.
Well, this is your typical chai hana, or restaurant. And in the middle of the day, everybody stops and they come to these different places. They're all over the place.
The ancient Greeks were renowned for their hospitality, a principle they called xenia. Here, Alexander would have found that just like Greece, it was usual for locals to take care of travellers, provide them with a place to sleep and enough food to eat.
The food here is fantastic. You've got fresh onion and tomato. You've got lovely rice and meat, soups, and then fantastic Afghan bread, which is delicious hot. And it's a really nice environment all the time. So it's really the way to eat in Afghanistan.
Finally, we make it safely into Balkh. The ruined citadel here is generally believed to be ancient Bactra. But I have some issues with this theory that I want to put to the test. The size and grandeur of this place simply takes your breath away.
Wow, that's enormous. Well, this is it. This is Balkh. And this huge cauldron here is the Hisor, the high wall. And inside it, well, history unfolded.
When Alexander's army marched into Bactra in 329 BC, it was already a great city. And it became his centre of operations in the battles to come. In almost every corner of this immense fortress, there's evidence of invasion.
Well, I can't really be sure if this is a man or a woman, or indeed how old the skull is. But what it does illustrate is the amount of human remains all throughout Balkh. And the reason for that is that Balkh was sacked an unbelievable 800 times in its history.
Balkh has been built up and wiped out so many times, we're walking across layer upon layer of human settlement.
These walls are full of lots and lots of secrets. The problem is, people are looking for them all the time. They're treasure hunters and they're digging up this place. It's like a rabbit warren. They're looking for gold, they're looking for coins and rings to sell.
As well as local looters, archaeologists have been digging up the past. But to date, none of the finds from this citadel can be traced back to the time of the Greeks or even the Persians. Balkh Citadel seems to have been founded much later, only reaching its peak during the golden age of Islam in the 8th century. More than 1,000 years after the Greeks had come and gone. I have doubts about whether the ruins of Balkh are really the remains of the Bactrian capital Alexander made his base camp. So, if not here, where is ancient Bactra? Tomorrow, I want to look for clues in the modern centre of Balkh.
It seems we're quite a hit in Balkh Market. Every man and his dog wants to know what we're up to.
Yeah, I'm David.
David.
Is the film action?
It's some action, yes. Well, according to all the histories, Balkh has been here for a very, very long time. And for almost all of that time, it's been a centre of culture and a centre of trade. The streets here are full of beliefs and relics from the distant past. And this is the oldest mosque in Afghanistan. In fact, it's the oldest mosque in Central Asia. It dates from about 800. And what's so special about it is it has influences from Greek, from Buddhist and Persian. What it means is at that time, all of those influences were here. So this is a remarkable time capsule of religion and the belief in God. Balkh has long been a meeting point for Eastern and Western culture. But at the 700-year-old Islamic madrasa, or school, not everyone is so welcoming. These are Talibs, religious students of Islam. Maybe Taliban, maybe not. Either way, they don't look too thrilled to see us, so we give them and the grand old madrasa a miss. Since 2001 and the fall of the Taliban government, beards are no longer fashionable, and the barber business is booming. For Afghans today, the Taliban are just one in a long line of invaders. 30 years ago, it would have been a Russian officer submitting to the barber's razor. In the Middle Ages, it could have been an Arab or a Mongol soldier. And in 329 BC, the invader was Alexander the Great. Through the years, Afghanistan has been attacked, destroyed, and rebuilt by almost everyone. Like every town in this region, here in Balkh, history is for sale. Selling antiquities here is forbidden by law, but it's almost impossible to police. And Reza knows a guy who knows a guy that sometimes deals in antiques. What I'm looking for here is a clue to ancient Bactra at the time of the Greeks. Now these pieces are incredible. They're from lots of different periods. You've got really ancient icons like the griffin and the lion. It's just this little collection on this handkerchief is just a treasure trove. But this is a piece that doesn't quite fit. Does he have any idea where he found this, where it was from?
فکر میکنه از کجا پیدا کردن خودتون از کجا یافتش؟ Yes, he says from the Daulatabad. I mean the farmer came from Daulatabad, brought with him.
This would be one of the rarest things you could find here. This is actually, it's bronze, and etched into it is a story, and it's probably a really, really ancient story, maybe ancient Persian, maybe even older. It's called a cylinder seal, and it's engraved with pictures that tell a story. So you basically roll this out. It can be into mud, so it can be left in the sun. And then there is the remains of what was an amazingly carved chapter of either a legend or somebody's life. Now you find these all over this part of the world, and they're very old. If this was found out at Zadian, was it?
Yeah, north of Balkh.
That means it's probably something like 3,500 BC, so 5,500 years old. It could be. So if you ever see one of these in an antique shop, take it to a museum.
Yeah.
If the cylinder seal came from the north, in Zadian, it points to the existence of a far more ancient civilization somewhere out on the dried-up Bactra Delta, once a tributary of the Oxus River. Another clue is the vast network of ancient canals that lead north across the delta. Much of the system now lies empty and broken, but in ancient times they watered more than twice as much land as today.
So canals like this have been watering Balkh for a very, very long time. And today, if you follow them around through the countryside, what they lead you to is life. It's surprising how cold it is, but then again, it is glaciated water, and it's not that far away from where it all comes from. And it's amazingly refreshing, God, on a day like this.
Irrigation here is everything. Without it, the land would rapidly become a desiccated dust bowl. If the ancient capital was located further north on the Bactra River Delta, then these canals must have watered it. My hope is they just might lead us to our goal. Like Alexander and his troops, we're heading for Zadian, a place rarely, if ever, visited by outsiders. This is a war zone. We need special permission to come out here. The road takes us deeper into remote areas of Afghanistan sympathetic to the Taliban. American and German armoured units do patrol the region, but patrols are sporadic. This is not a place you want to get lost in. But Reza knows a Muslim cleric, or mullah, who told him of ancient ruins in the area. Finally, we reach Zadian. Reza introduces me to the mullah. He tells us about the history of his town and directs us towards its famous minaret.
It's the oldest minaret in Afghanistan, he says. Yeah, oldest minaret in Afghanistan. As you cannot find any minaret more older than this minaret in Zadian.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We actually didn't come here to see this minaret, even though it's the oldest in Afghanistan. We've actually come here to use it as an observation tower for something much, much older.
It was built in the 13th century, and to have such an old minaret meant that this place, at least during the early Islamic period, must have been an important centre. It's a dry and lifeless place. It's hard to visualise how these lands could ever have supported farming, let alone a civilization. But in the distance, we can see the walls of a huge ancient structure.
Well, what Reza's been telling me is incredible. Out beyond that citadel are mounds and mounds and mounds. They're the remains of cities. This whole area was a civilization, at least 2,500 years old and probably older. But what's really incredible is that no one has been out there and explored it properly. It's a civilization waiting to be discovered.
Today this place is called Kafir Kala, Arabic for non-believers' castle. But when Alexander and his army pushed their way north, it would have been a thriving Bactrian community.
Also other side.
Not surprisingly, very few archaeologists have ever been out here. Since the late 1970s, the endless Afghan conflicts have made any meaningful exploration almost impossible. As we approach, I start to get a real sense of its size. These ramparts are more than 12 meters high. This was once a mighty fortified settlement with a large population. It's like a moonscape, isn't it? Well, it's about 42 degrees, 43 degrees. One of the problems about exploring places like this is these areas are full of landmines. And unless you're traveling with someone like Reza, who actually knows where to walk here, you've got to be really, really careful and just follow the paths. Zadian was ravaged by heavy fighting in the 1980s when Russian forces were in control of Afghanistan. This place became a stronghold of Afghan Mujahideen resistance. But as you can see, it's an incredible fortress. And amazing that only a few years ago it was used by the Afghans as a fortress to fight the Russians. Let's go down. Is this lost city the ancient capital? The massive defensive walls run through the desert for more than 100 kilometers. But it appears the stronghold itself just isn't big enough to be the city of Bactra. It must have been another perimeter fortress town. Just like the fortress at Emesh Tepe, it would have been an important part of a defense system that spread for hundreds of kilometers across Bactria. But it's not what we've been looking for. This region is so vast, finding a fabled city that disappeared over 2,000 years ago was never going to be easy. We begin the trek back to civilization deflated. It seems we've run out of options. But here in Afghanistan, news travels fast. A good mate of Reza's, named Mahbub, has heard that we're interested in ancient sites and asked to meet us.
Salam alaikum. Mahbub John?
It's the day before Navruz, the annual spring festival. And, like all Afghans, Mahbub's family are having a traditional open house. What a beautiful house. Navruz has been celebrated here every year for millennia, commemorated by Bactrians, Persians, and after Alexander's conquest, even the ancient Greeks.
I understand about the festival.
Mahbub's family are very much modern Afghans, keeping one eye on the present and the other on the traditions of the past.
That looks fantastic. Wow.
2,000 years ago, our people, they had to have 7 fruit because 7 fruit represent a new life. And we try, Afghan people, to continue this tradition.
Recently, Mahbub and his father were guides to a team of French archaeologists.
So it's a very good place.
They discovered a very special site deep in the mountains to the south. And he tells us that on the way to the French archaeological dig site, there's a mysterious system of tunnels that are yet to be deciphered. Could the city of Bactra be in the mountains?
a place where until recently no one had even thought to look. We've come 230 kilometres from the Afghan border through the city of Balkh and all the way to Zadian. Up until now, we've been searching the lowlands of the Bactra Delta, close to where it once met the Oxus River. But the dig site lies to the south, in the rugged ranges known to Alexander the Great and the ancient Greeks as the Paropamisus. What's really exciting is that some ancient Greek reports say that Bactra lay at the foot of the Paropamisus. We eventually find the tunnels Mahbub had told us about. But then it hits me. These aren't tunnels at all. They're part of an ancient system of aqueducts and canals. Like veins beside an artery, they follow the Bactra River all the way up into the mountains.
Well, this place is an incredible labyrinth. These tunnels brought water, probably thousands of years ago, down onto the plain where Bactria is today. But the sophistication of these tunnels is quite incredible. They're much more advanced than the canals that people are using today. So it just shows you what that world was like. The only problem is these places are full of wasps and bees, and I don't like wasps and bees. Ugh! One right next to my head. When I mean sophisticated, just have a look at these. These are actually bricks, and they're kiln fired. If I put my water on them, you'll see their colour. Now this is a whole detailed, amazingly structured foundation for these canals. And who knows how old these bricks are, but they're very sophisticated. It's at least 15 or 20 kilometres that these canals would have run. To build them would have taken thousands of man-hours. I mean, this was quite a civilization.
But this leaves us with a lot of unanswered questions. When was this network of canals built? And what city did it supply? We're following the broken trail of ancient Bactrian canals, and they appear to lead all the way to the French dig site. It's another 15 kilometres deeper into the mountains, along the Shulgara Valley. This was once an ancient trade link across the mountains, and it was very likely one of the routes used by Alexander's army. We're now well outside the zone regularly patrolled by coalition armoured units. The Taliban destroyed a convoy just a few kilometres south of here. And as luck would have it, it's exactly where the dig site's been located.
This place is called Cheshmi Shafa, which means the healing spring. And it's a really, really old place. People have been living here for more than 20,000 years. So what's really incredible is that French archaeologists actually found a whole city temple complex here. It ranges right across the plain and then up into these mountains. They think it's the largest in Central Asia.
We head on through the gorge. On the far side, the valley opens up into a wide and fertile wetland. To get a better view, Reza takes me to the ruins of a small frontier fort. It looks like a Garden of Eden. When Alexander arrived here,
the river would have been dammed and these plains intensively irrigated, making it a rich oasis. Well, this is about as far as the Oxus civilization came south. These citadels guarded its rear. But what this place affords us is a view back in time, because further down that river, they found evidence of people living here 20,000 years ago. Until the French archaeologists began digging, what no one had realized was that the valley had supported much more than just a frontier fort. This was one of the first places excavated, believed to be a sacred site belonging to one of the world's oldest religions. This was a Zoroastrian fire temple. Well, this whole valley would have been full of fire towers. Right along the ridges, the whole place would have been lit up like a Christmas tree. But this shrine was special. This is the main Zoroastrian site for the whole valley. And can you imagine what this place would have been like 2,500 years ago? It would have been one of the greatest centers in Central Asia. On top of this altar would have burnt the eternal flame. Zoroastrians believe that fire represents the light of their one God. I believe that this is Mazar-i-Sharif, a legendary center of the Zoroastrian religion. A religion that connected a succession of empires and millions of people all over the Near and Far East. This extraordinary city temple complex would have been a place of pilgrimage for hundreds of years, long before Alexander's time. If this is Mazar-i-Sharif, it will amount to one of the greatest discoveries in recent archaeology. And I think that there are signs in this valley of an even greater prize. Sometimes something is so large that it remains hidden in plain sight. Down beside the river is what appears to be the foundations of an enormous fortified city. Many of the Greek reports in the time of Alexander describe Mazar-i-Sharif as a twin city. And its twin was ancient Bactra. They tell us that the two cities lay at the foot of the Parapamesus Mountains, and the Bactra River flowed past their walls. This place matches those accounts perfectly. I believe the cities the Greeks were describing are both right here. Not only is Mazar-i-Sharif in this valley, but also ancient Bactra. High on the left bank of the river was Mazar-i-Sharif. On the right bank was the city of Bactra. It would have been a mass of palaces, urban dwellings, and wide avenues. Easily comparable to the sophisticated cities of ancient Greece. Bactra was immense, home to tens of thousands of Bactrians and Persians. When Alexander arrived, it must have been a wondrous sight. This is truly a revelation. For more than 2,000 years, one of the Earth's greatest cities lay undetected and undisturbed in this sacred river valley. Discovering ancient Bactra is like finding the lost city of Atlantis. An archaeological and historical breakthrough of immeasurable significance. Here lies the extraordinary capital of the Oxus civilization, the mother of all cities. Laying claim to Bactra was a strategic triumph for Alexander the Great. Within 2 years, he would lead the Greeks all the way to the borders of the Indian subcontinent in a campaign that would become legend. Surrounded by a series of fortress towns like Emesh-Tepe, Bactria's imposing defence system was a sign of its wealth and importance long before the arrival of Alexander. And despite the ravages of time, traces of this extraordinary ancient civilization survive today. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here, 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. On his extraordinary 3-year-long Central Asian campaign, Alexander's army scaled the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush and crossed the mighty River Oxus, pushing the frontiers of his new empire deep into Persian territory. In Bactria and Sogdia, Alexander found highly advanced cities and religious centres. Defended by a host of volatile local tribes that vastly outnumbered the invading Greeks.
For 2 years, Alexander fought a series of running battles. Almost 120,000 people died. Now for me, how could he have possibly built any cities while he was fighting these guys?
As he travelled, Alexander is said to have built a great network of Greek cities. But is this the real story? I'm going in search of the ancient culture he conquered and the lost city that bears his name, Alexandria on the Oxus. Today, coalition forces fight for control of Afghanistan. But over 2,300 years ago, it was Alexander the Great who attempted to conquer this challenging land. I've hitched a round trip on a troop transport to get a view of the lands Alexander fought over. By the time Alexander arrived here in 329 BC, he and his army had experienced more than 5 years of war. In a series of great battles, he'd clashed with his Persian rival, fighting his way 4,000 kilometers across the earth, from Greece in the west to the borders of India in the east. Now emperor of half the known world, he'd achieved more than any conqueror before him. Alexander's army defeated the forces of his mortal enemy, Darius III, but victory wasn't sweet. Before he could capture the Persian king and force him to surrender the throne, Darius was murdered. The assassin was Bessus, the Bactrian governor. Now Bessus claimed Darius's title for himself. Relentlessly, Alexander pursued the usurper, right into the heart of the ancient land of Bactria, modern-day Afghanistan.
Gregor!
A place that is still a war zone today.
Well, this is ISAF headquarters for all of northern Afghanistan. And here there are 16 nations here to provide security for reconstruction and development here. But what's incredible is that their experience is actually similar to Alexander the Great.
The soldiers are here to protect Mazar-i-Sharif airfield. It's from here that the coalition forces' German contingent run fighter missions. And it's also the centre of operations for ground forces in northern Afghanistan. We head out of the base into the blue box, the immediate patrol area around the airfield. Roughly 400 square kilometres.
Thanks.
For this German armoured battalion, living on a knife edge is routine. The danger of ambush or IEDs, improvised explosive devices, is ever present. The patrols constantly vary their routes, but they monitor a set area and will use this road again. We've almost no information at all about what life was like here for Alexander and the Greeks. Much of what's reported about him is caught up in myth and legend. But what's certain is that Alexander's commanders would have been covering the same territory as our patrol.
So these guys are just setting a cordon around this area, make sure that there's no threat, and then they'll stay here for a few minutes and to see if everything's okay. We're about 3 or 4 k's up into the mountains away from the base, not quite to the extent of the blue box that they call it, their patrol area, but we're definitely in country that could be a problem.
This is a land known since ancient times for its formidable defence system, rugged terrain, and hostile inhabitants. But surprisingly, Alexander marched into the Bactrian capital unopposed. When his forces arrived, instead of taking up arms, the Bactrians laid low. Alexander was not conducting an out-and-out war. He was on a manhunt. His enemy Bessus had now fled across the Oxus River. Like these German soldiers, the first thing that Alexander would have done is secure the passes and the outer checkpoints.
So how soon before you arrive are they informed that you're coming, or that they expect you?
No, I don't think so.
So it's just
Surprise.
good.
This mountain pass is just as good a site for an ambush today as it was in the time of the ancient Greeks. Over 2,300 years after Alexander's army marched through here, the Germans are taking the same military precautions. Instead of a German and an Afghan soldier, this would have been an ancient Greek or Macedonian commander checking with a Bactrian officer. Salam alaikum. The combined international force in Afghanistan today is double the size of Alexander's. His 55,000-strong army was outnumbered by the Bactrians. Yet remarkably, during the first 6 months of occupation, Alexander seized control of Bactrian defences and cities relatively peacefully. The renegade Bessus was betrayed by his own people and delivered to Alexander. He ordered that Bessus be tortured and killed. Now Alexander needed to make the mark of his authority in his new Eastern Empire. He is said to have founded a series of great Alexandrian cities in Central Asia. But today, we know that more than half of these settlements were already established when Alexander arrived. He simply conquered and renamed them. Alexander left the infrastructure of the Persian Empire intact. For the Bactrians, life went on pretty much as it had under Persian rule. To explore what it would have been like for Alexander to rule here, I've come to the city centre of Mazar-i-Sharif, a place where old customs die hard. And there's one ancient celebration that's still a spectacle today. Navruz is the local New Year festival. As the newly self-appointed Emperor of Greater Persia, Alexander and his generals would almost certainly have presided over this, the most important event in the ancient calendar. This is a ceremony known as the Janda Borlaw, the banner raising. It's rooted in ancient Bactrian, Indian and Persian New Year cults. Today, it's an Islamic ritual. The belief is that the banners at the top of the pole have the healing powers of Ali, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law. When Alexander was here, over 2 millennia ago, kings of all the nations of the Persian Empire brought gifts to honour their emperor. Today, instead of Alexander, it's the local governor. Only leading dignitaries gain entry to the inner sanctum. Everyone else has to find whatever vantage point they can. To secure a peaceful takeover, Alexander continued these age-old traditions. But he had to be watchful for insurrection and anarchy. Locals believe that if you grab a piece of material, you'll gain some of its power. It's said that the first to touch it will be cured of wounds and disease, even blindness. We stand a very good chance of being crushed. It's time to get out of here. We are at the gate. Alexander stood no chance of maintaining control through force alone.
The Bactrians had a highly organised infantry, and their cavalry totalled some 30,000 horsemen, a huge force, quite capable of matching Alexander's meagre 6,000 mounted soldiers. And the power of the Bactrian horse can still be seen on the plains of Afghanistan to this day. Meet Halem. Monday to Friday, he's a taxi driver. But on weekends, for a few months of the year, he's a combatant in a traditional horseback tournament called Buzkashi. The wood slats are to prevent his fibula and tibia being snapped. The padded coat is to absorb the blows of the whip. Hopefully the Russian tank helmet he's wearing is stronger than it looks. The Buzkashi matches held during Navruz are the most prestigious of the year. This is the greatest game of all. So important, it's like the Afghan Super Bowl. Before the match starts, everyone checks out the best horses. Halem won this event last year, but the competition is pretty impressive. Have you ever seen a horse as big as this? That neck is incredible. These are such powerful animals. Have you ever wondered what Alexander's horse might have looked like? That's it. Probably black, I think, but that's about the size he would have been riding, they think. Fantastic. Today, it's the generals and the governor who preside over the game. But during his rule, Alexander would have sat here. We're told he fitted right in, adopting Persian dress and protocol. A brilliant horseman himself, Alexander may even have joined in games of strength and skill like Buzkashi. The aim is to pick up the 50-kilo headless calf, ride around the flag and back to the circle without getting beaten senseless. Originally, it would have been played with the body of an enemy. This is an echo of the ancient past, the closest thing we will ever see to a real battle from the 4th century BC. In conflict, the big Bactrian horses were used like battering rams to plough through the enemy. It would have been a ferocious slaughter. Today, deaths are rare. It's usually just bloodied faces and broken bones. Halem has been right in the thick of it. He's had a fall and he's pretty dazed. This year, it looks like a new champion will be crowned. To the victors go the spoils. In this case, TVs and electrical appliances. It wasn't only superior numbers in battle that Alexander had to worry about. It was the hostile environment. Leaving a small force to garrison Bactria in the spring of 329 BC, Alexander and the bulk of his army prepared to move on. From the city of Mazar-i-Sharif, we're travelling across 75 kilometres of desert to the banks of the Oxus, the vast and tempestuous waterway that has shaped this ancient land. Today, it marks the northernmost edge of Afghanistan. Alexander had to cross the river
to penetrate north into the ancient region of Sogdia, modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, to secure the borders of his new empire against attack by nomadic tribes. Alexander's biographers tell us that his army, crossing the desert without food or water, lost more men than in any battle. Sandstorms out here are legendary, and simply finding the crossing without good guides may have made the difference between life and death. Alexander finally reached the banks of the Oxus, with his army exhausted and in disarray. After surviving the desert, he was now faced with another immense barrier: the river itself. I want to find out what it was like to cross the Oxus in the same way Alexander did. So we've picked a spot where the river's not too wide, and my new friend Osman has been preparing materials for us to build a raft. It was about March, they think, and he had about 3/4 of a mile to cross with all his troops and their equipment. It was an incredible undertaking, and actually must have scared the Macedonians and the Greeks to death, because this is a very fickle and strange river. So what we're going to do is build a traditional raft in the way it was described in the descriptions about Alexander. Now, what they did is actually use goat skin, just like this. It's pretty manky. This is actually salted. And what they did was turn them inside out, like that, and then sew them together and then stuff them with straw. Now, these are just from the local market, and they've been cut and butchered. When they saw Alexander's forces preparing to cross the river, the local tribesmen left their homes and farms and began to retreat inland. But not before they wiped out all their resources, to make it harder for Alexander and his army to follow them. Well, today they're actually burning this stuff off to get new growth to come out. But in Alexander's time, they would have burned it because they didn't want him to get it. They actually burnt everything. They burnt their houses, they burnt their grain, they burnt the fields, hoping to starve them out. But Alexander's men would have been familiar with these tactics, and they were not about to starve. They might have been a bit hungry when they got to the river, and they were certainly thirsty, but the scorched earth didn't work. That's good. Let's see how heavy it is. Ah, beautiful. Let's have a look. Okay, we'll see you in a little while. See you later, thanks. With improvised rafts like this, the huge army took 5 full days to get across. Then as now, the river is travelling at a heck of a rate. For every 500 metres I paddle across, I'm being carried roughly 3 kilometres, that's nearly 2 miles, downstream. Well, this is taking longer than I thought, and of course this river is a lot faster than everybody gives it credit for. Come on. Come on. This boy. Come on. We're told Alexander's troops crossed with few losses. But there must have been sodden soldiers and horses along the river, as far as the eye could see. Well, we made it. It's quite a feat. And if this river was any bigger, well, it almost would be impossible. So I'm sure that Alexander actually did this at a low point in the river, otherwise it would have been suicide. But this little raft is really fit for a king. Woo! Now, the problem is, I've got to get back.
Alexander's army spent almost 3 years fighting to maintain their foothold, both north and south of the Oxus, in the kingdoms of Bactria and Sogdia. As he travelled, Alexander is reputed to have built a series of great cities. But how could he have managed to build cities at the same time as fighting both the elements and local tribes? A network of great Alexandrian cities is a nice idea, but I don't think it's true. When Alexander became Emperor of the East, these lands already had their own cities. I believe Alexander renamed them and little else. There's only one place we know for sure was built by Alexander, but historians believe all he constructed here was a simple fort. The rest of Alexander's cities have never been found. It's said that built on the banks of the river was the most alluring city of all, Alexandria on the Oxus. If I can find a trace of this ancient metropolis, it would mean there is some truth behind the legend of Alexander's cities in Central Asia. The first place I want to check out is an ancient site in Uzbekistan on the northern bank of the Oxus. It's likely to have been a place Alexander seized from the local Sogdian tribes. Well, we're not actually sure where Alexander crossed the Oxus, because there's 3 or 4 crossing points all along here. But once he would have massed his troops together and crossed the river flats, he would have come up against the first Sogdian defences. Now this is Camp Tepe. Now what we're not sure of is whether it was just a fortress or whether it was a great city. And to find out, we're going to go and meet one of Uzbekistan's most eminent archaeologists. Professor Eduard Retveladze has spent the last 30 years of his life patiently scraping away thousands of years of dust from the ancient riverbank. According to the professor's theory, Alexander constructed an elaborate Greek settlement here as a mark of his authority. It's hard to tell because more than half the site has been wiped out by the river. Though there's no question that at one time this was a spectacular city.
This gate, one side, another side. This arch.
And then this was the citadel and the palace.
Yes,
Yeah.
maybe.
Maybe palace.
Maybe palace.
Okay.
Place, in this place. This 3 parts: Acropolis, Lower City, and Upper City.
Okay.
This part destroyed.
This is destroyed by Amudarya.
Yes.
By
yes.
Oxus.
Oxus. This Oxus destroyed. This place destroyed.
Takes everything.
Yes.
So you think this is Alexandria on the Oxus?
Alexandria Oxiana, yes. Alexander Oxus.
Well, what the professors found here over the last 30 years is that this was here when Alexander came through. It was a fort and he destroyed it. And what the professor thinks is that he came back and actually built a city, and it was Alexandria on the Oxus. But for us, there's a lot more to dig up before we can actually confirm that. Is Camp Tepe old enough to be Alexander's great city? I'm not convinced. Alexander was marching north. His army probably spent only a few days here on the river at most. It's likely he simply left some Greek soldiers here to garrison the Sogdian fort, and the city developed long after Alexander had come and gone. I want to explore what remains of ancient Sogdian culture today. I've got a new guide called Gazelle and a new set of wheels. There's no better way to explore Central Asia than on a cantankerous piece of Soviet engineering like a 1973 Ural 650. But it's taking Gazelle a little time to adjust to life on the open road. These locals trace their ancestry back to the Sogdian warriors that challenged Alexander over 2,000 years ago. They'd refused to accept a permanent military presence in their lands, and a full-scale revolt against the Greek invaders broke out. To get an idea of what Alexander came up against, I've come to see an ancient martial art called Kurash. This style of combat is said to be more than 3,500 years old. Once skirmishing became close range, spears and swords would have been no use. Warriors had to grapple with each other in hand-to-hand combat to try and throw their opponent to the ground and create enough space to use their weapons and strike the killing blow.
These young guys have incredible skills, but can you imagine what an army of their fathers would have been like? Well, that's what Alexander came up against, and for 2 years he fought a series of running battles. Almost 120,000 people died. Now, for me, how could he have possibly built any cities while he was fighting these guys?
We know Alexander must have been daunted by the opposition, because in a letter to his mother, he wrote, "I am in the land of lion-like and brave people, where every foot of ground is like a well of steel confronting my soldiers. You have brought only one into this world, but everyone in this land can be called an Alexander." Facing battle after battle, the image of Alexander as a great city builder seems more and more unlikely. At times, it must even have seemed that he'd met his match. But Alexander found another way to win the battle. And a clue lies in customs still practiced today. Some friends of Guzal's have invited us to a party to celebrate Hatna Kilish, the coming-of-age ceremony of their youngest boy. Instead of the young man, it's the dancing girl that seems to be attracting all the attention. She's part of the entertainment. But it seems only the men are being entertained. Their wives don't seem to be having quite so much fun. Beautiful dancing girls are nothing new here. It was in Sogdia that Alexander met Roxanne, a local beauty he took as his wife. His troops had suffered defeat and heavy losses, and it seemed
the Sogdians would fight him till the end. Now, Alexander tried a different tactic. By marrying Sogdian nobility, he hoped to win their loyalty and a lasting peace. I've crossed the border into Tajikistan. Here the story of Alexander and Roxanne's romance remains deeply woven into the cultural fabric to this day. And it's easy to imagine that ancient Sogdia was once as rich and colourful as this marketplace.
And if you're wondering what the Sogdians were really like, well, all you have to do is just have a look around. They're everywhere. Despite the civilizations and the different invasions, they've remained. And if you look really hard and long enough, well, you just might find Roxanne. Okay? Спасибо.
I think Roxanne's story might be the key to finding Alexandria on the Oxus. I've arranged to stay with a local family at a small farm. Then as now, farming was the main occupation. They still pick cotton, just as Roxanne's clanswomen would have done. Before their journey east, the Greeks had never seen cotton. Alexander described it as vegetable wool. His troops stuffed it in their saddlebags and carried it home to Greece, introducing cotton to Europe for the first time. Beside the cotton plants, the Oxus River Valley would have been lined with vineyards and irrigated fields planted with vegetables and grains. Here they still make food the traditional way, and they're intensely proud of their heritage. We're told that Roxanne's father, Oxyates, was a powerful local clan leader. When Alexander conquered Oxyates' fortress, instead of killing him, he invited Oxyates to become his negotiator and his sons to join the Greek army. Then he asked to take Roxanne as his wife. I believe Alexander's marriage was part of a carefully calculated political alliance with the unruly Sogdians. Many scholars believe that Alexander and Roxanne were married across the border in Afghanistan. But ask any Tajik and they'll tell you that the story unfolded right here in Tajikistan at Hisor Castle.
Well, this marvellous citadel is actually completely man-made. It must be 300 or 400 feet up here. But it's the last northerly extension of the Bactrian Empire. It's about 80 kilometres north of the Oxus, and this is about as far as they spread. And this is where Alexander came as well. He conquered this place, and even when he got here, this was an amazing citadel, a really developed civilization. They don't know how old it is. It could be 3,500, 4,000 years old. But what's also exciting is that he may have met Roxanne here, which makes it a pretty special place.
So special, in fact, that every weekend, Tajik newlyweds come here to be enriched by the romance of Roxanne and Alexander.
While much is made of their love affair, it's more likely that the marriage to Roxanne served Alexander's need for a symbolic union with the locals. With Roxanne by his side, he took on the role of kinsman instead of conqueror. But I think Roxanne may have represented something even more valuable to Alexander than a political alliance. She was a link to their gods. And there's a hint in her name. The Greeks pronounced it Roxana, but it may originally have been Vakshana, which would mean she belonged to the Vaksu, an ancient name for the Oxus River. So by marrying Vakshana, Alexander was cleverly creating a union with local water deities. In so doing, he would have been seen to bathe in the light of immortality, an all-powerful new leader. So if this is correct, it's more than likely Alexander actually married his bride on the banks of the river. He could have chosen the site of a revered local temple to build his city, Alexandria, on the Oxus. Our search for this lost city has taken us from Mazar-i-Sharif across the Oxus River to the ancient fort of Kampa-Tepe. Then on through the farms of Tajikistan to Hisor Castle. Now we're heading 160 kilometres south to the banks of the Oxus to find the ruins of the most unique ancient water temple ever discovered in these lands. The route takes us right to the Tajik-Afghan border. Not a place that's open to tourists.
They don't allow many people to come here.
You need a special permit.
Yeah.
We've been given access on the condition that the army is with us every step of the way. This is Takta Sungin. When Alexander married Roxanne in 327 BC, it would have been one of the most magnificent sites on the River Oxus, an established centre of pilgrimage belonging to one of the world's oldest religions. So this is what they call the temple on the Oxus. And it's a very, very difficult place to get to. As you can see, we're right on the river. And on the Tajik side, this is a very, very secure border and it's guarded all the time. Now this was only excavated about 6 or 7 years ago, first by the Japanese. Before then, it was untouched. But it's an incredibly important site because it goes back before Alexander the Great, or at least that's what they think now. So it's at least 500 BC. And what it gives us is an idea that these societies and this civilization was actually incredibly rich before the Greeks came. So this must have been a hallway going right through. And this drainage system is amazing because that's very advanced. This was a very special temple complex belonging to an ancient religion called Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrians worshipped a universal creator. And for them, fire and water were agents of ritual purity. In ancient times, it's likely ceremonies took place in the sacred waters of the Oxus. As Alexander's army conquered this land, most towns were abandoned or destroyed. But Tuktesungeen was left largely intact. Why would Alexander have spared it? Perhaps because it was dedicated to the same sacred river as his bride-to-be, Vakshana. It may even have been the auspicious setting for his imperial wedding. So could this be Alexandria on the Oxus? It was a thriving riverside settlement, and some of the artifacts discovered here are Greek in origin. Tuktesungeen appears to have been used by locals and Greeks long after Alexander's conquest. In my search for Alexandria on the Oxus, this extraordinary place is, I believe, a definite contender. But if this is Alexander's lost city, then yet another piece of his legend will crumble away. It is certain that he didn't found or build Tuktesungeen. This marvelous temple city was already here, long before Alexander arrived. Alexander led his army on a phenomenal mission to the river Oxus, the ancient heart of a lost world. His conquests are seen as the greatest triumph in the history of the Greek Empire. But that could be as far as the truth behind his legend really goes. In Central Asia to date, not one of his fabled Alexandrian cities has ever been unearthed. Far from bringing civilization to the barbarous peoples of the East, Alexander found a series of highly advanced centres. As the audacious new emperor of the East, Alexander faced resistance at every turn. He forged alliances here. But so far, I've found no convincing evidence of the magnificent riverside city he is reputed to have built on the Oxus.